welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Blake Mizelle, and I'm going to be taking you guys through this webinar. I am our Insights Operations Manager here at NationBuilder. I work on our professional services team. I've been at NationBuilder for about 4 years, and previously to joining the team at NationBuilder, I worked with a lot of NationBuilder customers as an architect and app developer in the ecosystem. So I've been supporting organizations with their data strategies and digital campaign practices for about a decade now. So yeah, today I've prepared some material for y'all and hoping to take y'all through a little webinar here that we're calling Giving Season Unwrapped, year-over-year insights from Giving Tuesday to year end. So we're going to dig into some fundraising data and talk about how to pull actionable insights out of that data. To keep it high level, and I'll tell y'all to get started, we're going to dive into and try to unpack a lot of theory today. I'm going to try to move slow in the beginning, but I think that that's really where the richness of this material is, and then we'll do a little test at the end together. But yeah, our main goal today is essentially to shift how your team reads fundraising data. We're trying to move you from collecting metrics to building understanding that actually changes what you do next. Just some high level objectives for how we're going to spend our time together today. We're going to talk about making your data a tool, some NationBuilder approaches for how to unpack those fundraising questions. We're going to lower the barrier to analysis. So I'm going to give you some practical steps that folks on your team can kind of take and use, sort of bite-sized information that anyone can follow along with. And then, yeah, we're going to start turning those metrics into meaning. So talk about some of the frequent metrics around fundraising and end of year fundraising, Giving Tuesday data, and try to sift out what really matters in that. So yeah, just a little preview of the agenda here. We have already kind of done an intro, talked about our goals. So next we're going to jump into quite a bit of framing and talk about defining success. And then we're going to start turning those metrics into questions. That's kind of the sciencey part of this thing. And then we'll do a little like practice together, talk about some NationBuilder strategies for how to do this. And then at the very end, I've got a little pitch and plug for y'all for my product that I support, which is NationBuilder Insights. This is our like data add-on tool available to NationBuilder enterprise customers, but a little bit more about that later. At the top, framing and defining success. Essentially, why does this whole thing matter? The data paradox is probably a great place to start. And the headline here is that most organizations, most companies are data rich and understanding poor. And what that means is that your team is tracking, donations, opens, clicks, event signups, volunteers. You're tracking more data than you ever have. And that trend is increasing. But teams are still making big decisions either by instinct or just by blasting everyone by default or just kind of following along with industry benchmarks. The gap between what your data says and how you understand how to use it is where there's opportunity. And that's where we're going to be operating today. That's what we're digging into, is that gap between what the numbers say and how we understand those numbers. In other words, what I'm saying is more data doesn't necessarily equal greater understanding. Exports, dashboards, and filters, they give you lots of counts, metrics, but without a method for understanding what those numbers mean, they don't help a whole lot. Essentially, this is a methodology problem, not a tooling one. And just for a bit here, kind of zooming out, I want to talk about defining success. And you'll notice that I've already spent a lot of time kind of theoretically unpacking this. If any of you are out there are like me, when I was coming up through school, I played sports. I was a basketball player. And if you've ever walked into like a team sport, especially at lower levels like that, you've probably had a coach on those first few days say, we're not looking at a basketball today. We're just going to get in the gym and we're going to run or we're going to do sprints. That's kind of the philosophy here. Essentially, what that coach is saying is that our success is predicated upon our condition as athletes primarily and not our ability as basketball players. So the conditioning comes first. And that success is sort of defined before you even get into the game, right? And what I'm trying to instill here, distill, is that defining your own success is a really, really important place to start. And I'm going to try to, teach you a little bit about how to think about that, how to do that, because it's such a huge thing to unpack. Essentially, you want to ask questions that predict outcomes, not just ones that are super easy to report or that are used as typical benchmarks. A definition of success is not open rates above 50%. Um, Another thing to remember is campaign outcomes aren't standardized. Success looks very different across different organizations and issue areas. What works for, a food bank in Alabama doesn't work for a community organization in California. Every org is going to be different, and your list, your supporters are going to want and behave differently. Um, the best place to start is deciding what matters for most for your team in this moment. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but I like to put time bounds on all of these things. So they're a qualifier of, just a year. That's a really good place to start. The next 12 months, what do we want to hone in on? So if we're taking this and talking about a fundraising and development team, what would mean success for those efforts over the next year? Here's a few examples here, and you'll hear me say this a couple of times today. The goal of this webinar is to give you guys, a playbook of information to use. I'm definitely not telling you which one of these things to start with. Again, your organization's going to be different. But here's a few of the frequent ones we hear when we're dealing with sort of the donor development world and that sort of data. Bringing in more donations, keeping more donors coming back, getting more people to give monthly, or, some other goal. Force yourself to the best of your ability to choose the one here that's most important, that's highest impact. It's really hard to pick when you're talking about these big, lofty goals, but it's important that you hone in because that makes the analysis easier later on. So just to recap all of that, we're going to put together a little framework here about defining success. And again, before we're looking at any metrics, just keep this kind of kernel of truth in mind that most teams don't ever explicitly define measurable success. Instead of asking, what should we track? Or you want to start with what outcome would show you're most successful this year. That's kind of where we're headed. So again, pick one primary outcome, choose a single clear goal for the next 12 months. Focus that into one framed clear question about that outcome. You can turn that into a specific time-bound question that you can answer. Again, narrow questions make results really actionable. Here's an example here. Are prospects who engaged but didn't donate on Giving Tuesday more likely to donate at end of year? See how that's sort of testable already? And lastly, consider how to measure this in NationBuilder. So if all of you guys are doing this type of analysis and you're working in your nation, as you're thinking through these questions, go ahead and build into that, make it easy on yourself. Build into it, okay, how can we pull this out of a filter? Predefine how you'll pull the number, and that helps with guessing later on. So all of this to say, if I could put this in one sentence, reporting is really good at showing us what happened. But in order to move from that, we got to ask better questions about the data to allow ourselves to move from what happened to what matters. In other words, your data is a tool. Now, that's a pretty natural segue because if we're talking about asking better questions, how do we do that, right? This is, I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with this, maybe the movie. I'm a huge baseball and stats nerd. And one of my favorite movies ever is Moneyball. There's a pivotal scene in that movie and book where they're talking about understanding exactly what makes a good baseball team or baseball player. What is the sort of definition of success there? And there's a really pivotal moment where one of the really bright guys who's kind of diving into the stats offers up that, the Red Sox look at this player and they see, $4 million star, the way most sports teams think about players. And he says, I look at him and I see an imperfect understanding of where runs come from. In other words, runs win baseball games. You score to win, and the stats tell a different story. So what's happening there is, are the teams asking the right question? Is is this entire thing about who's the best player, or is it about how do we score the most runs? That's kind of the mindset, the frame that we want to be in when we're talking about this sort of data interrogation work and building those questions out. Um, so a few methods here. Again, this is a playbook. These are not all the methods, but they are a few quick ones that are really easy to take on. And they're some of my favorites that I kind of go back to all the time. And we're going to go through three of those today. I'm calling those the behavior ladder, the flip test, and then the last one, drill down until you learn something. Some people call that method the five whys, but we'll talk about it when we get into it. Again, the muscle here is this isn't about building the right questions to ask or knowing the right questions to ask. It's about flexing that muscle, building the instinct to ask questions that actually teach you something. You're trying to pull out insights here, trying to learn things. So yeah, let's jump right into it. For the behavior ladder, the a central method here is you want to start with any of your metrics. This is really good if you're kind of just taking a look, just diving in, pulling some initial filters. Start with those metrics, and then you add who and when, and climb those numbers up until you start seeing like actionable insight. How this works is we talk a lot in digital campaigning about the engagement ladder. This sort of lets you retroactively look at that engagement ladder through data and kind of follow your supporter journeys to see what's really happening there. Because when we're doing campaign work, we oftentimes want to design engagement ladders, but sometimes those ladders aren't exactly in practice all that's happening. There are different ways that supporters are engaging with us, and it's helpful to kind of follow those breadcrumbs back through. So let's do an example together real quick. What's our donor retention rate for new Giving Tuesday donors? So, pretty hard metric to it's very granular to get started with. We want to add behavior. All right, who gave again? We're talking about donor retention. Let's add that time frame. Let's make it time bound. So who gave again within 90 days? There's our win. And then lastly, we're going to add comparison. What's different about the 90-day repeat donors? So now we have two groups of folks that we've distinguished based on a category. And we can take a look at how did this group behave versus this group. Notice how each rung of that ladder makes the question just that much more valuable. You might notice that with this method, you're finding tons of questions that you want to test, and that's totally fine. This one kind of works like a question generator. Your definition of success is very helpful here, where if you're generating a bunch of things and you're like, man, I don't know where to start, let that steer you. Let your definition of success help you choose and weed out what you want to start with in terms of testing. The magic of this particular method, it happens when you stop measuring things, again, measuring that behavior ladder, and start measuring people. And that's all because things don't make decisions. And what you're trying to weed out here is the decisions that your supporters are making when they're engaging with you at scale. But things don't make decisions, people do. And that's kind of what you're reading in this. For our second method today, the flip test. I like this one in particular because it seems super simple on its face, and yet it can unveil some very cool things. Instead of measuring what you expect to see, measure the exact opposite, and then kind of discover what you're missing in that difference. So for this example, how about our Giving Tuesday campaign had a 30% open rate? This is kind of the sentence that we hear when we start unpacking how like campaign performance and how fundraising, outreach is doing. We start immediately diving into these benchmarked, open click rates, that sort of thing. Well, we're going to go a little deeper here. How about we flip the focus? What about the 70% who didn't open? And then we're going to add some action there. Did any of the non-openers still donate? And then try to find some insight in that. How are people engaging in ways that we're not measuring? So again, about finding that other, the data that we're the story that hasn't been told, that we haven't uncovered yet with this data. And you see how flipping that perspective can reveal some blind spots. Like maybe there's a person who's feeling a bit overwhelmed by the email that they're receiving from your organization, so they've stopped opening, but they still want to engage and they're still donating. That's important to know and understand, so you can communicate with that person in a better way. You may discover that your metrics are, missing entire donor pathways. That's something like we talked about in the last test. And that's all opportunity. Like maybe that particular individual or a cohort of others prefer just fundraising over SMS messages. They don't want, email communications. It could be something as simple as that. It could be more complex. This one all works because our brains want to celebrate what worked. They see the metric, they see the passing the benchmark, and they want to say, yeah, we did it, check the box. But the flip forces you out of those patterns and it lets you learn a little bit more from the things that you think aren't working. And lastly, we're going to talk about the drill down. I also refer to this as the 5 whys. I love this one so much. My former manager really worked with me and taught this one to me quite a bit when working with customers. It seems a little bit crazy when you first apply it, but it is literally keep asking. So take really, really broad results and keep drilling down and investigating and making things narrow until you find some insight that's hidden inside. So essentially just keep asking why. Our Giving Tuesday campaigns raised 25% less than last year. Again, this is the type of sentence that's thrown around when we're talking about these types of campaigns and we're analyzing results. Okay, let's start with why. Why did fewer people participate this year? We'll keep asking. Why did our regular donors skip this campaign? All right, we'll ask again. Are longtime supporters becoming less engaged? Is this an overall trend? And let's say to do that, we have to go out and ask some supporters, and then we start hearing back, well, why are they saying all of our asks feel the same? Like, is there something here that we should adjust or change? Already, just from a very broad Giving Tuesday didn't go the way we intended, we've boiled down to, okay, we have some things to test here, just a little bit of anecdotal evidence and looking back through data. We have ideas of where to start testing this to find answers. Maybe longtime donors need different messaging. We could test some exclusive insider updates or just more stewardship. Every additional layer of asking why gets you closer to something that you can wrap your hands around. The instinct here is to stop thinking once we have an answer. And that's what you want to push back against. Drilling down forces you to keep thinking until you have a solution. All right. Now that I've taken y'all through some of those methods, I would love to spend a bit more time doing this in practice with some real data. You'll see a couple of tests here, and we'll try to apply all 3 of these methods as I kind of talk through it. And I'll talk a little bit about like how to approach this with NationBuilder features as well. So yeah, let's get into our first one. All right. So in my hypothetical Giving Tuesday example here, I've got some data for you from 3 years of Giving Tuesday campaigns. This is 2023, 2024, and 2025. And you'll see on its face, we're doing pretty good. We've had some good campaigns. It's been a really steady 3 years and, 3 years of revenue growth. We've raised our highest amount this year on Giving Tuesday that we ever have. And our donors are up 10%, a little bit down this year from last year, but overall up. Not doing too bad. But I don't want to stop here because this is my brain just telling me, check the box. I'm going to keep going and try to dig in with some of these methods we've learned. So in my example here, I am starting with my definition of success. And our actual goal here is to build sustainable fundraising capacity. Like that's what I've decided my organization needs the most is a sustainable, capacity to raise money. And my success metric tied to that is growing my donor base. I need more donors that are actively engaged that I can, willingly go to and say, here, here's some more, we need some more money from you guys. My question that I formulated from this is, in order to reach our goals, I think we need more donors. Are we actually growing our donor base? All right, let's step through this. And for this one, we're going to use the drill down method just to find us a place to get started. So the 140 donors from this year's Giving Tuesday campaign, who are they? All right, well, how many of them are new? Is this their first year giving to us versus returning? Maybe they've given in a previous year's campaign. All right, well, if there's some differences there in those counts, what happened to last year's donors? Some of this stuff is actually pretty easy to pull out just directly within NationBuilder. So for the new versus returning, I've set up kind of an example filter of how I would do this. If you've got your campaigns tagged by year, you can just kind of do the campaign tag and set it up in a mutually exclusive filter, like I have this one here, where you're seeing that I'm pulling the signups directly in the people section here of NationBuilder. For everyone that was involved in the 2024 campaign, but wasn't involved in the 25 campaign. And you could do this for as many years as you want and kind of pull those individual counts out, those slices. Once I do that, I end up with something kind of like this. And I've got sliced data in terms of the donors who were lapsed or retained. And then I've got our total included for 23 here, so we can kind of follow that back. So just doing some quick math here. You see in 24, we're retaining 60. That's 48% retention. In 25, retaining 70, 47. So, I'm thinking about growing my donor base here, and I'm starting to see we're getting lots of new donors every year in Giving Tuesday. Our acquisition is actually doing really good. It's retention that's a problem when I'm talking about growing my base. Donors aren't coming back. So again, going back to our face value, how we took this thing, our initial insight in this was 3 years of revenue growth, highest amount. Instead, we've found a little bit of a different story to tell about this data now. We started with an expectation and we kept asking questions. And now we have a new theory to test. If I add some additional stewardship touch points, maybe throughout the year, will that lead to more retention? And maybe it's, how I'm approaching donors in the interim. So yeah, already we've got something that we can immediately go and start pulling between, just A/B testing that. All right, let's dive in a little deeper. I want to use some of the same metrics from the last example, but for this example, I want to use two different methods. So let's look at those 60 new donors that gave on Giving Tuesday 2025. And let's see if we can dig a little bit deeper with our methods here. So again, my actual goal is to build sustainable fundraising capacity. And in order to do that, I think I need to grow my donor base. But this time I'm coming into it with a question of what actions can we take that will encourage those donors to kind of stay involved and keep giving. I like this one because this is the type of question that gets you benchmark answers. And the assumption here, the very, very solid benchmark and best practice is that people who give should be added to your fundraising list so they can be asked again and get regular asks. So we're going to operate off of that assumption. But this time we're going to start with the flip test. All right. The best practice here is add people who give to your fundraising list. So someone donated to us on Giving Tuesday, they've been rolled into the list, and they now get our regular appeals. I want to flip that. And I want to just pause for a second and be like, should every donor be automatically added to the list, just kind of rolled in there? I think there's more to look at. So in order to get a greater understanding, I'd like to try to go through the behavior ladder on this one as well. All right, let's just follow this down. So let's go and say this donor, one of the new donors from 25, sees our Giving Tuesday campaign. They feel really inspired. They give us money for the first time because the campaign really spoke to them. After that, they get an automated thank you, which is a great best practice. And then they're added to our fundraising list. They get like a special tag maybe, so that they can be reached out to for future fundraising asks. This time of year in particular, there's some precarity here, because 2 weeks later after Giving Tuesday, that fundraising list gets a year-end emergency appeal. It's kind of generic. It doesn't mention their first donation. There's been no communication in between other than the thank you. A week after that, another push goes out, more end of year feeling, urgency driving, again, full of best practice information, final hours, trying to really drive the money. The problem here is that this new donor is just, they don't know how to take this. And in January, they kind of just feel a little overwhelmed, maybe checked out. Maybe they're thinking, this organization's kind of like all the others, and I'm just going to filter out their emails. I think what they're doing is cool, but I don't really need to see all this fundraising information. So yeah, they unsubscribe or they set up a Gmail filter and they never really see your emails and they kind of stop engaging. Again, going back to our assumption or our benchmark here, people who give once should be added to the fundraising list. And reminder of what my question was here, what actions can we take that will encourage donors to stay involved and continue giving? Maybe this is more about how we're talking to existing donors. So again, going back to my retention problem. And now I've arrived at a new theory to test. The sustained digital engagement with less solicitation lead to more retained donors. I have something very specific and measurable that I can begin to test. So let's talk about how we might test this, just an example test method. You could define a new segment of donors or define a segment of the new donors from Giving Tuesday or your end of year campaigns. I like building a filter and then throwing those onto a NationBuilder list, or if you're using tags more for your campaigns, you can use that to source the people and then add them to a list. The reason for that is that NationBuilder automatic list splitting is fantastic for ratios. So if you're looking to test, I just want to do some extra stewardship touch points on this particular audience, throw them onto a NationBuilder list, and then you can put in ratios for 70% and 30%, and then you've got your 30% test audience, and that's divided up and randomized for you automatically. You never have to import or export anything. I love that feature. Then again, I skipped to the end a little bit there, but have the segment get less solicitation. So if you're doing the test, your 30% that you've list split, just maybe test and see how it works with let's say that you're kind of in a jam and you don't have many staff resources, so extra solicitation or stewardship touches just too much. If you don't want to treat these particular folks differently, a really simple test is to just suppress them, right? Make sure that whatever they're getting, maybe it's more of the regular content, your action alerts, but maybe they just don't get as many fundraising asks. That's a really good low bar way to observe if there's a difference happening here. And then, use lists and tags, and you can track the donor retention for the two groups. And then don't forget to define your timeline there. So the way that works is a lot like our last example, where you can use filters to pull out those total counts. But this time we're just doing it instead of comparing year to year, you compare the two different audiences, sort of A, B, and then look at the retention after 30 days, 90 days, 180 days, whatever that time slice is that you feel comfortable with. And track engagement as well. Like this is a really good example where the total counts, the donor retention is kind of what we've been focused on. But there are some proxy data points that might be interesting here where maybe the folks that you're soliciting less or that have been given sort of an extra stewardship path, um, maybe those folks are engaging more. Like maybe they open and click more. Maybe they participate in more advocacy campaigns. That's kind of important information. And that's something that you can easily track now that they are tagged within your nation. You can pull that out as well. Now, here's my segue. It's a little bit difficult to get down to, let's say, like email open rate of a particular cohort of people that are tagged a certain way in NationBuilder directly within NationBuilder. Pulling that number out that's not like a total or an aggregate count can be a little bit difficult. And that's where NationBuilder Insights comes in. NationBuilder Insights is an add-on tool available to enterprise customers. It is a dedicated data studio that's built on top of Tableau. So it's really useful for visualization, and it's powered by I think 3+ like NationBuilder data sources that are running underneath that refresh your data daily from your nation into this Tableau instance. Currently, the offering comes with 3 stock dashboards that support this kind of data analysis workflow for email metrics, fundraising, and supporter growth analysis. In my last example, that's one of my perfect workflows for Insights. I absolutely love it for this because you can actually just go into the email metric dashboard and filter down for your campaign tag or your variant audience tag, and the dashboard will just completely change to show you open, click, rates, all of those aggregate metric counts for that specific cohort. So you can do those kind of robust workflows of pulling out analysis between different cohorts of supporters, and it makes this whole testing process a lot more automated, a lot quicker. Again, this is an add-on product, and it's available for customers on NationBuilder Enterprise plans. If there's anyone here who's interested and you want some more information on this, please go to www.nationbuilder.com/NB_insights. There's some more information on that page, and a form there, a contact form that if you'll fill out, will get you on board for a demo. But yeah, thank you all so much for hearing me out today. This has been really fun. Again, the goal today was to kind of change how you're thinking about this and give you a playbook that opens this sort of data world up for y'all. There's a ton of threads to pull out here, so please don't feel overwhelmed by it. And these are not all the answers. It's just a little bit of a way into it to help you explore a little bit more. So yeah, thank you all so much and have a great day.